And girls. Today I'll be reading chapter 17 from the BFG. Chapter 17 is called Journey to London. So this is where the BFG and Sophie are traveling to London to give that dream, or that nightmare rather, the Trogglehumper, to the Queen of England. And we're going to really hope that everything goes how it's supposed to, and that she gets that horrible dream and wakes up and realizes that, something has to be done to stop these giants. So hopefully that happens. I'll show you the picture first. That there is the BFG, and they're on their way, of course, to London. And if you look up on top, kind of peeking over his ear, is Sophie. Remember, she decided to ride in his ear. The great yellow wasteland lay dim and milky in the moonlight as the big friendly giant went galloping across it. Sophie, still wearing only her nightie, was reclining comfortably in a crevice of the BFG's right ear. She was actually in the outer rim of the ear, near the top, where the edge of the ear folds over, and this folding over bit made sort of a roof for her and gave her wonderful protection against the rushing wind. So she's kind of like right under here. What is more, she was lying on skin that was soft and warm and almost velvety. Nobody, she told herself, had ever traveled in greater comfort. Sophie peered over the rim of the ear and watched the desolate landscape of giant country go whizzing by. They were certainly moving fast. The BFG went bouncing off the ground as though there were rockets in his toes, and each stride he took lifted him about 100 feet into the air. But he had not yet gone into that whizzing top gear of his when the ground became blurred by speed and the wind howled and his feet didn't seem to be touching anything but air. That would come later. Remember when the BFG traveled to Giant Country with Sophie when he had first taken her? Remember he went into that like hyper speed where he was, each step was like the length of a football field? Sophie had not slept for a long time. She was very tired. She was also warm and comfortable. She dozed off. She didn't know how long she slept, but when she woke up again and looked out over the edge of the ear, the landscape had changed completely. They were in a green country now, with mountains and forests. It was still dark, but the moon was shining as brightly as ever. Suddenly, and without slowing his pace, the BFG turned his head sharply to the left. For the first time during the entire journey, he spoke a few words. "Look quick over there," he said, pointing his long trumpet. Sophie looked in the direction he was pointing. Through the murky darkness, all she saw at first was a great cloud of dust, about 300 yards away. Those is the other giants, all galloping back home after their guzzle, the BFG said. Then Sophie saw them. In the light of the moon, she saw all 9 of those monstrous half-naked brutes thundering across the landscape together. They were galloping in a pack, their necks craned forward, their arms bent at the elbows, and worst of all, their stomachs bulging. The strides they took were incredible. Their speed was unbelievable. Their feet pounded and thundered on the ground and left a great sheet of dust behind them. But in 10 seconds, they were gone. So here's a picture of those giants running past. "A lot of little girlsies and boysies is no longer sleeping in their beds tonight," the BFG said. Sophie felt quite ill, but this grim encounter made her more than ever determined to go through with her mission. It must have been about an hour or so later that the BFG began to slow his pace. "We is in England now," he said suddenly. Dark though it was, Sophie could see that they were in a country of green fields with neat hedges in between the fields. There were hills and trees all over them, and occasionally there were roads with lights of cars moving along. Each time they came to a road, the BFG was over it and away, and no motorist could possibly have seen anything except a quick black shadow flashing overhead. All at once, a curious orange-colored glow appeared in the night sky ahead of them. "We're coming close to London," the BFG said. He slowed to a trot. He began looking about curiously. Groups of houses were now appearing on all sides, but there was still no light in their windows. It was too early for anyone to be getting up yet. Somebody's bound to see us, Sophie said. Never is they seeing me, the BFG said confidently. You is forgetting that I is doing this sort of thing for years and years and years. No human being is ever catching even the smallest wink of me. I did, Sophie whispered. Ah, he said. Yes, but you was the very first. During the next half hour, things moved so swiftly and so silently that Sophie, crouched in the giant's ear, was unable to understand exactly what was going on. They were in streets. There were houses everywhere. Sometimes there were shops. There were bright lamps in the streets, and there were quite a few people about, and there were cars with their lights on. But nobody ever noticed the BFG. It was impossible to understand quite how he did it. There was a sort of magic in his movements. He seemed to melt into the shadows. He would glide. That was the only word to describe his way of moving. He would glide noiselessly from one dark place to another, always moving, always gliding forward through the streets of London, his black cloak blending with the shadows of the night. So London is a very big city, which they're in. They made it to London, and the BFG is kind of like moving, gliding, I guess, kind of like in the shadows, so that he's not seen, because it will be morning soon. It was quite possible that one or two late-night wanderers might have thought they saw a tall black shadow skimming swiftly down the murky side street. But even if they had, they would never have believed their own eyes. They would have dismissed it as an illusion and blamed themselves for seeing things that weren't there. Sophie and the BFG came at last to a large place full of trees. There was a road running through it and a lake. There were no people in this place, and the BFG stopped for the first time since they set out from his cave many hours before. "What's the matter?" Sophie whispered in her under-the-breath voice. "I is in a bit of a puddle," he said. "You're doing marvelously," Sophie whispered. "No, I isn't," he said. "I is now completely boggled. I is lost." "But why?" "Because we is meant to be in the middle of London, and suddenly we is in green pastures." So remember when we were learning at the very beginning of the year about communities? So London is an urban community. It's a city where there's lots of noise, lots of people, lots of traffic and commotion, and they found themselves in, he said, a green pasture. So he's thinking he's in like a rural type community where there are not as many people, houses and things are spread out, and there's lots of open space. So he's a little bit confused. He's thinking I should be in a city, but I don't feel like I'm in a city right now. So he said, because we is meant to be in the middle of London, and suddenly we is in green pastures. "Don't be silly," Sophie whispered. "This is the middle of London. It's called Hyde Park. I know exactly where you are." "You is joking." "I'm not. I swear I'm not. We're almost there." "You mean we is nearly at the Queen's Palace?" cried the BFG. "It's just across the street," Sophie whispered. "This is where I take over." So now Sophie's kind of taking charge. "Which way?" the BFG asked. "Straight ahead." The BFG trotted forward through the deserted park. "Now stop." The BFG stopped. So I'll show you the picture here. So here is the BFG. And Sophie is up there on top of his ear. He has his giant trumpet. And he's in Hyde Park, which is very close to the palace. Okay. The BFG stopped. "You see that huge roundabout ahead of us just outside the park?" Sophie whispered. "I see it. That is Hyde Park Corner. Even now, when there is still an hour before dawn, so there's an hour before like the sun comes up, there is still quite a lot of traffic moving around Hyde Park Corner." Then Sophie whispered, "In the middle of the roundabout," so a roundabout is like what we might call like a rotary. We don't have too many of them around here, but it's like when the road, instead of coming to like a stop sign and going either left or right or straight, it's like a big circle. And you get in the circle and then you get off like at any part. But the cars you can kind of stay in the circle and keep going, and then you sort of just get off at your spot. And in London, they have a lot of those. Let me see, where was I? Okay. In the middle of the roundabout, there is an enormous stone arch with a statue of a horse and a rider on top of it. Can you see that? The BFG peered through the trees. I is seeing it, he said. Do you think that if you took a very fast run at it, you could jump clear over Hyde Park Corner, over the arch, and over the horse and rider, and land on the pavement on the other side? Easy, the BFG said. You're sure? You're absolutely sure? I promise, the BFG said. Whatever you do, you mustn't land in the middle of Hyde Park Corner. So even though it's not a busy time of day, if he was kind of stuck in the middle with all of those cars and everything, he would certainly be seen, and that could be bad. Then he wouldn't be able to give the Queen of England that nightmare, so the whole plan wouldn't work. Don't get so flustered, the BFG said. To me, that is a snitchy little jump. That's not a thing-a-ling-ling. There's not a thing-a-ling-ling to it. Then go, Sophie whispered. The BFG broke into a full gallop. He went scorching across the park, and just before he reached the railings that divided it from the street, he took off. It was a gigantic leap. He flew high over Hyde Park Corner and landed as softly as a cat on the pavement on the other side. Oh, phew. So he made it. So here's a picture of him kind of like running and about to sort of jump over. So that's good. Well done, Sophie whispered. Now quick, over that wall. Directly in front of them, bordering the pavement, there was a brick wall with fearsome-looking spikes all along the top of it. A swift crouch, a little leap, and the BFG was over it. I think I showed you a picture for the wrong part. Sorry. That part I just read about him jumping over that wall with the spikes, that's what this picture goes to. Sometimes an illustration isn't always on the same page as the part that the illustration is about. So sometimes, I'll read something, then I'll turn the page and realize, oops, that illustration went with a different part. So sometimes that happens, as you guys know. Okay, so a swift crouch, a little leap, and the BFG was over it. We're there, Sophie whispered excitedly. We're in the Queen's back garden. So they made it. They made it to the palace. They're in the Queen's back garden. So everything is so far is in place. They made it where they need to be. They haven't been seen yet. The next chapter for tomorrow is called The Palace. And of course, that is the Queen's palace. So they'll have to kind of get Sophie situated in the windowsill, and the BFG will have to blow that Trogglehumper, that nightmare, into the Queen of England. And we'll see what happens. We'll have to just keep our fingers crossed that this plan goes well. All right. I'll see you guys later. Bye.